The rain arrived without warning that Tuesday afternoon in downtown Portland, turning the glass towers into mirrors of gray. Inside the 47th floor of Ashford Global Enterprises, Elena Reyes stood before the mahogany desk of her department supervisor, her hands trembling despite her efforts to appear composed. The fluorescent lights above hummed with indifference as Janet Keller, a woman whose ambition had long ago calcified into cruelty, slid a termination letter across the polished surface. "Effective immediately," Janet said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd done this many times before. "Your performance has been inconsistent. We're letting you go." Elena felt the words like a physical blow. Inconsistent. The accusation hung in the air, heavy with injustice. For 18 months, she'd arrived before dawn and left after dark, double-checking financial reports that others had abandoned, catching errors that would have cost the company millions. But Janet had never forgiven her for that presentation last spring, the one where Elena's data had contradicted Janet's projections in front of the executive board, the one that had made Janet look incompetent. This wasn't about performance. This was about revenge. "There must be some mistake," Elena managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've exceeded every quarterly target. My accuracy rate is 98%. Janet's smile was thin, practiced. "The decision is final, Miss Reyes. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." Elena's vision blurred. Not from the injustice, though that cut deep, but from the devastating reality of what this meant. The prescription bottle in her purse suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a weight that might crush her entirely. Lupimarin, the medication that kept her rare autoimmune disease from destroying her kidneys, her heart, her future. Each dose cost $3,000. Her insurance had been tied to this job. She had exactly 4 pills left. The elevator descent felt endless. Elena pressed herself into the corner, away from the security guard's sympathetic gaze, and tried to control her breathing. Panic wouldn't help. Panic never helped. She'd learned that during the first hospitalization 3 years ago, when the doctors had finally diagnosed the condition that had been slowly poisoning her blood. Systemic autoimmune vasculitis, they'd called it. Rare, aggressive, treatable only with Lupimarin, a medication so expensive that even with insurance, she'd been drowning in medical debt. Without insurance, it was impossible. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, all polished marble and modern art that she'd once found inspiring. Now it felt like a mausoleum. She'd loved this job, believed in the company's mission to provide sustainable investment solutions. She'd thought her work mattered. "I'm sorry," the security guard murmured as she signed the final exit papers. He was older, with kind eyes that reminded her of her father. "You seem like good people." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She clutched the small cardboard box containing her desk photos, her grandmother in Oaxaca, her younger brother Marco at his college graduation, and walked toward the revolving doors. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the afternoon into premature twilight. She made it 3 steps into the deluge before the tears came. They mixed with the rain, indistinguishable, as she stood on the sidewalk, letting the water soak through her blazer. People rushed past with umbrellas, their faces turned down, absorbed in their own survival. No one stopped. No one noticed a woman falling apart in slow motion. 4 pills. Maybe 10 days if she rationed them. Then what? The hospital had been clear during her last visit. Missing even a week of treatment could trigger organ failure. Her kidneys were already compromised. Her heart showed early signs of inflammation. Lupimarin wasn't just keeping her healthy, It was keeping her alive. Elena pressed her hand against the building's exterior wall, steadying herself. She couldn't afford to collapse here, not on this street where she'd walked with such purpose every morning. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to survive this. But all she could feel was the crushing weight of impossibility. She didn't know how long she stood there. Minutes or hours, time had become elastic, before the voice cut through the sound of rain. "Miss Reyes?" Elena turned, wiping uselessly at her face. Through the curtain of water, she recognized him immediately. Nathaniel Ashford. Not just any executive, but the Ashford founder and CEO of the empire whose building she'd just been expelled from. She'd seen him exactly twice in her 18 months of employment. Once during her initial orientation in a crowded auditorium, and once passing through the 47th floor like a distant comet, surrounded by assistance and urgency. He stood before her now without an umbrella, his expensive suit darkening with rain, his dark hair plastered against his forehead. At 38, he carried himself with the particular intensity of men who'd built something from nothing and couldn't stop building. But his eyes, she noticed, held an unexpected softness. "You're getting soaked," he said, and she realized that might be the most obvious statement anyone had ever made to her. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, then nearly laughed at the absurdity. Nothing about this moment was fine. She was unemployed, dying, and standing in a rainstorm holding a cardboard box of memories. Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "I just came from the executive floor. Janet mentioned a termination in your department, but she didn't say—" He stopped, studying her face with an attention that made her uncomfortable. "She didn't say anything that would explain why one of my employees is standing in the rain, looking like their world just ended." "Former employee," Elena corrected quietly. "As of 20 minutes ago." Something shifted in his expression. What was the reason given? Inconsistent performance. The words tasted bitter. "What's your actual performance record?" Elena hesitated. There was no point in defending herself now. The decision was made, the letter signed. But something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than polite inquiry, made her answer honestly. 98% accuracy rate, top 15% in departmental productivity, 3 commendations for preventing critical financial errors. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That's not inconsistent, that's exceptional." He pulled out his phone, rain immediately spotting the screen. "Give me your full name and employee number." "It won't change anything," Elena said. "Your supervisor made her decision." "Janet Keller isn't the final authority in my company," Nathaniel replied, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "I am." For a moment, Elna felt a flicker of something dangerous, hope. But hope required energy she didn't have, and faith in systems that had already failed her. She clutched the box tighter against her chest. "Thank you for the concern, Mr. Ashford, but I need to go." She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her. "Why are you crying?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Elena found herself answering before she could think better of it. "Because I just lost the only thing keeping me alive." Nathaniel went very still. "Your job?" "My insurance." The admission came out as barely more than a whisper. "I have a rare autoimmune disease. The treatment costs tens of thousands a month. Without insurance, I can't afford it. Without the treatment—" She trailed off, unable to say the rest. The rain continued its relentless percussion against concrete and glass. Somewhere above them, in those towers of steel and ambition, people were working, thriving, building futures. Down here, Elena was watching hers dissolve. Nathaniel Ashford looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, perhaps, or calculation, or something deeper that she didn't have the emotional capacity to interpret. Then he did something that would change everything. He asked a simple question. "What's the name of your medication?" Elena stared at him, confused by the question's specificity. "Lupimirin," she said finally. "It's a specialized immunosuppressant. There's no generic alternative." Nathaniel was already typing on his phone, his fingers moving with swift precision despite the rain. Elena watched, bewildered, as his expression shifted from concentration to something harder to define. Determination mixed with disbelief. $3,000 per dose, he said, reading from his screen. Twice weekly administration, no substitutes currently approved by the FDA. He looked up at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Recognition. Not of her personally, but of the situation's cruel mathematics. "You're rationing what you have left." It wasn't a question. Elena nodded anyway, feeling stripped bare by his understanding. "I have 4 pills. I was going to call the hospital tomorrow, see if they have any assistance programs, but—" She trailed off. They both knew how those programs worked. Months of applications, bureaucratic mazes, requirements that would take longer than her body could wait. How long before missing doses becomes dangerous? A week, maybe less. Elena's voice cracked. "My kidneys are already compromised. The inflammation progresses quickly without treatment." Nathaniel pocketed his phone and looked at her with an intensity that made her want to step back. But there was nowhere to go except further into the rain. "Miss Reyes, I'm going to ask you to trust me with something. Can you do that?" "I don't even know you," Elena replied, though the words came out more sad than defensive. "I know." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "But I know what it's like to watch someone die because medicine costs more than hope." "And I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever had the power to prevent that, I would." Before Elena could process what he meant, Nathaniel gestured toward a black town car that had pulled up to the curb. "My driver. Let me take you somewhere dry, and we'll figure this out." Every instinct told Elena to refuse. She didn't accept rides from strangers, even billionaire strangers who just witnessed her breakdown. But exhaustion had its own gravity, and the cold rain had seeped into her bones. More than that, something in Nathaniel Ashford's voice carried a weight of personal experience that bypassed her defenses. "Okay," she whispered. The car's interior was warm, leather-scented, impossibly quiet after the chaos of the storm. Elena set her soggy cardboard box on the floor and tried not to drip too obviously onto the expensive upholstery. Nathaniel sat across from her, already on his phone again, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Richard, I need you to pull an employee termination file from today. Elena Reyes, Financial Analysis Department. Yes, immediately. And get me Dr. Catherine Wolfe at Portland General on the line." He paused, listening. "I don't care if she's in surgery. Tell her it's Nathaniel Ashford and it's about Lupimirin access. She'll take the call." Elena felt like she was watching a storm of a different kind. One made of power and connections and the kind of influence that could bend reality. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead she found herself studying Nathaniel Ashford with new curiosity. The way he spoke wasn't performative. It was efficient, focused, the tone of someone solving a problem rather than making a show of solving it. "Who did you lose?" Elena asked quietly. Nathaniel looked up from his phone, surprised. "What?" "You said you know what it's like to watch someone die because medicine costs more than hope. Who was it?" For a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "My sister, Caroline." She was 16 when she was diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. We weren't wealthy then. My father was a factory worker. My mother cleaned houses. The treatment existed, but insurance wouldn't cover it. Experimental, they said. Not proven enough. His voice had gone flat, distant. We tried everything. Fundraisers, loans, second mortgages. But it wasn't enough, and it wasn't fast enough. She died 3 months before her 17th birthday. Elena felt her chest constrict. I'm so sorry. I built this company with her in mind, Nathaniel continued, still looking at something beyond the car window, beyond the rain-soaked streets. Every investment decision, every profit, every expansion, I kept thinking, would this have been enough to save Caroline? And when the answer became yes, when I finally had enough money to have saved her 10 times over, she'd been gone for 8 years. He turned back to Elena, and she saw grief there that time hadn't softened, only disciplined. So when I see someone facing that same impossible choice, that same cruel mathematics of survival, I don't walk away. The phone buzzed. Nathaniel answered immediately. Dr. Wolf, thank you for taking my call. I have a patient who needs immediate access to Lupamarin. Yes, autoimmune vasculitis. She's been on it for 3 years, but just lost her insurance coverage. He listened, nodding. That's what I thought. Can you arrange compassionate access through the manufacturer? I'll guarantee payment personally for the first 6 months while we establish a foundation grant. Elena's breath caught. 6 months. He was talking about 6 months of medication, over $300,000, as casually as someone might offer to buy coffee. Mr. Ashford, she started, but he held up a hand. Excellent, he said into the phone. I'll have my assistant send over the details within the hour. One more thing, I want you to do a complete workup. Full panel, specialist consultations, whatever she needs. Yes, I understand the cost. His eyes met Elena's. That's not the concern here. Health is. When he ended the call, Elena was shaking, not from cold anymore, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. I can't let you do this, she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm a stranger. I'm just someone who happened to get fired from your company. You're someone who was unjustly terminated, Nathaniel corrected, and you're someone who deserves to live. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Elena, may I call you Elena? She nodded, too overwhelmed to object. I'm not doing this because I'm a saint. I'm not even doing it primarily because it's the right thing to do, though it is. He paused, choosing his words with care. I'm doing it because 18 years ago, I stood in a hospital corridor and made a promise to a dying 16-year-old girl that if I ever had the power to prevent someone else's family from feeling what we felt, I would use it. This isn't charity. It's a debt I owe to someone who can't collect it herself. Elena pressed her hands against her face, trying to hold back fresh tears. But these were different from the ones she'd shed on the sidewalk. These carried relief so profound, it felt almost painful. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Nathaniel said, but his voice had gentled. We still need to address what happened today. That termination was wrong on every level. He pulled up something on his phone, reading quickly. Your direct supervisor, Janet Keller, has a pattern of questionable personnel decisions. This isn't the first time she's dismissed high-performing employees who challenged her authority. She won't like you reversing her decision, Elena said. Then she's welcome to find employment elsewhere. Nathaniel's tone left no room for argument. I don't tolerate vindictive management in my company, but that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, we get you to the hospital, get you assessed properly, and get you stable. The car was pulling into the circular drive of Portland General Hospital, its modern glass facade glowing against the darkening sky. Elena looked at the building where she'd spent so many frightening hours, receiving diagnoses that had reshaped her understanding of mortality. But tonight, walking through those doors felt different. Tonight, she wasn't alone. "I'm coming in with you," Nathaniel said, already reaching for the door handle. "Dr. Wolf is expecting us both." "You don't have to," Elena started. "I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently. "But Caroline went through all her treatments alone because I was too young to be allowed in the rooms with her. I've always wondered if it would have been easier for her to have someone there, holding her hand through the fear." He met Elena's eyes. "So if you'll let me, I'd like to be that person for you tonight. Not as your employer or some distant benefactor, just as someone who understands what it's like to be afraid." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built around herself beginning to crack. For 3 years, she'd fought this disease alone, not wanting to burden her family in Mexico, too proud to ask friends for help. She'd become so accustomed to isolation that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer genuine support. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." As they walked through the hospital's automatic doors, Elena carrying her waterlogged box of belongings and Nathaniel Ashford at her side, she realized that this strange, impossible day had shifted into something she couldn't yet name, something that felt like the beginning of a story rather than the end of one. Behind them, the rain continued to fall on Portland, washing the streets clean. Dr. Catherine Wolfe was waiting for them in a private consultation room on the 4th floor, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came from decades of difficult decisions. She was younger than Elena expected, mid-50s perhaps, but carried herself with the authority of someone who'd earned every bit of respect she commanded. "Nathaniel," she said warmly, shaking his hand before turning to Elena. "And you must be Elena Reyes. Please, sit down." The room was designed for comfort rather than clinical efficiency. Soft lighting, upholstered chairs, a window overlooking the city lights beginning to pierce through the storm clouds. Elena sank into one of the chairs, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past hours was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep fatigue. "I've reviewed your medical history," Dr. Wolfe said, pulling up records on her tablet. "You were diagnosed 3 years ago with systemic autoimmune vasculitis, started on Lupamarin after initial hospitalization, and have been on continuous treatment since. Your last blood work was," she scrolled, "6 weeks ago. Kidney function stable, but showing chronic inflammation markers. Cardiac echo showed mild pericardial effusion." Elena nodded, the medical terminology washing over her like a familiar and unwelcome tide. She'd memorized all of it during those first terrifying months, learning to translate the clinical language of her body's betrayal. "The good news," Dr. Wolfe continued, "is that Nathaniel's call got us moving quickly. I've already contacted the pharmaceutical company, and they've agreed to provide Lupamarin through their compassionate use program. You'll have your first dose tonight, and we'll set up a regular administration schedule moving forward." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that she felt lightheaded. "Tonight?" "Within the hour," Dr. Wolfe confirmed. "But I want to do a complete workup first. New baseline labs, updated imaging, consultation with our nephrology and rheumatology teams. You've been managing this condition reactively, treating symptoms as they arise. I want to shift to a proactive approach, see if we can't get ahead of the inflammation instead of constantly chasing it." "That sounds expensive," Elena said quietly, old fears resurfacing despite everything. Dr. Wolfe glanced at Nathaniel, who was leaning against the window frame, his expression unreadable. "Cost isn't the barrier here anymore," the doctor said gently. "Health is the priority. Let us worry about the logistics." Elena wanted to argue, to protest that she couldn't accept this much help from someone she barely knew. But the truth was, she was drowning, and Nathaniel Ashford had thrown her a lifeline. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when her kidneys were failing, not when her heart was showing signs of stress, not when every day without proper treatment brought her closer to irreversible damage. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you. I'll have a nurse come take you to pre-op, Doctor," Wolf said, standing. "We'll get those labs started and have you admitted overnight for observation once you receive the medication. Just a precaution. We want to make sure there are no adverse reactions after your gap in treatment." When the doctor left, Elena and Nathaniel were alone in the quiet room. The city lights beyond the window had grown brighter as true night settled over Portland, transforming the rain-slicked streets into ribbons of reflected gold and silver. Elena stared at the view, trying to process the impossible turn her life had taken in the span of a few hours. "You're doing it again," Nathaniel said softly. Elena turned to him. "Doing what?" "Trying to convince yourself this isn't real. That you'll wake up tomorrow and still be alone, still be dying, still be without options." He moved away from the window, taking the chair Dr. Wolf had vacated. "I recognized the look. I wore it myself for years after Caroline died. This sense that anything good was temporary, that tragedy was the only reliable constant. It's hard to trust good fortune, Elena admitted, especially when it comes from nowhere. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from you standing in the rain, telling the truth about your situation instead of pretending everything was fine. It came from you being willing to be vulnerable with a stranger. Nathaniel paused, his gaze steady. Most people would have lied, would have protected their pride even at the cost of their life. You chose differently. Elena laughed, but it came out hollow. "I didn't choose anything. I just broke down. There wasn't enough left of me to maintain the facade." "Sometimes breaking down is the bravest thing we can do," Nathaniel replied. "It certainly takes more courage than holding everything together with wire and wishful thinking." A nurse appeared in the doorway, young and efficient, carrying a tablet and a warm smile. "Miss Reyes, I'm Sarah. I'll be taking you down to get those labs started. Should only take about 30 minutes, then we'll get you settled in a room upstairs." Elena stood, suddenly reluctant to leave the safety of this moment. As long as she stayed in this room with Nathaniel Ashford, the reality of her situation felt manageable. But following the nurse meant stepping back into the medical machinery that had defined so much of her life. The needles and tests, and waiting, always waiting, for results that might shift from hopeful to devastating without warning. "I'll be here when you get back," Nathaniel said, reading her hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." "You don't have to stay," Elena protested. "I'm sure you have nowhere more important to be," he interrupted firmly. "I meant what I said earlier. You're not going through this alone tonight." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. For 3 years, she'd been the strong one, the person who smiled through fear and never let anyone see how terrified she was. But something about Nathaniel's steadfast presence, this billionaire stranger who'd inserted himself into her crisis without hesitation, was dismantling her carefully constructed armor. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything. Thank me by getting healthy," Nathaniel replied. "That's the only payment I want." Following Sarah down the sterile hospital corridors, Elena found herself thinking about the strange mathematics of fate. This morning, she'd woken up believing her life had a certain shape, difficult but manageable, lonely but sustainable. By afternoon, That shape had shattered completely. And now, in the strange twilight hours of evening, it was reforming into something she couldn't yet comprehend. The lab work was routine, vials of blood drawn with practiced efficiency, questions about symptoms and pain levels, the familiar ritual of medical assessment. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't rationing hope, carefully measuring out how much optimism she could afford before reality crushed it. This time, she could actually believe that treatment would continue, that tomorrow wasn't a countdown to organ failure. When Sarah finally wheeled her to a private room on the 6th floor, Elena was surprised to find it already occupied. Nathaniel sat in the chair by the window, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, scrolling through his phone with the focused attention of someone managing an empire, even in a hospital room. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "How did it go?" "Fine," Elena said, as Sarah helped her settle into the bed. "They took enough blood to supply a small vampire colony, but otherwise, painless." Nathaniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face from severely handsome to genuinely warm. "The lupamarin should be here within 20 minutes. Dr. Wolf said it'll be administered intravenously. Takes about an hour." "You don't really have to stay for that," Elena said, though she hoped he wouldn't take her up on the offer. "I know I don't have to," Nathaniel replied, echoing his earlier words. "But I want to, unless you'd prefer privacy?" Elena shook her head. "No, I'd like the company, actually." "Then I'm staying." He set his phone aside, giving her his complete attention. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with work or illness, something that defines you beyond the circumstances that brought you here." The question surprised her. Elena had become so accustomed to defining herself through her disease, the patient, the survivor, the person fighting for each day, that she'd almost forgotten there were other parts of her identity. "I wanted to be a photographer," she said finally. "Before all this, before the diagnosis and the medical debt and the desperate scramble to keep insurance. I studied photography in college, spent summers traveling through Mexico, documenting indigenous communities and their traditions. My grandmother is Zapotec, from Oaxaca, and I wanted to preserve those stories through images." "What happened to that dream?" Nathaniel asked gently. "Reality," Elena replied with a sad smile. "Photography doesn't pay for lupamarin. Financial analysis does. So I put away the camera and picked up spreadsheets." She paused. "I tell myself it's temporary, that someday when I'm stable and out of debt, I'll go back to it. But I've been telling myself that for 3 years now." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could do both?" Before Elena could respond, a nurse arrived with her medication, and the conversation shifted to logistics and monitoring. But as the lupamarin dripped slowly into her veins, carrying with it the promise of more tomorrows, Elena found herself returning to Nathaniel's question. What if she didn't have to choose? What if this impossible day was offering her more than just survival? What if it was offering her the chance to actually live again? The medication took exactly 58 minutes to complete its slow journey into Elena's bloodstream. Nathaniel stayed the entire time, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just present, a quiet, steady anchor in the sterile room. They talked about small things, his favorite coffee shops in Portland, her brother Marco's ambitions to become a civil engineer, the way the city looked different from hospital windows than from office towers. It was the kind of conversation that felt both meaningless and essential, filling space while something more significant, settled between them. When the IV finally finished and the nurse removed the line, Elena felt a familiar heaviness in her limbs, the medication's common side effect. Not unpleasant exactly, but a reminder that her body was under chemical management, that wellness wasn't natural but manufactured. "You should rest," Nathaniel said, noticing her exhaustion. "Dr. Wolf wants you to sleep here tonight so they can monitor your response." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Elena asked, then immediately felt foolish. He'd already done more than anyone could reasonably expect. She had no right to ask for more of his time. But Nathaniel didn't hesitate. "Of course. I want to hear what the specialist consultations reveal, and we still need to address your employment situation." Elena had almost forgotten about that. The termination, Janet Keller's vindictive smile, the security guard's apologetic eyes. It felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. "You really don't have to reinstate me. I can find another position somewhere else." "Elena." Nathaniel's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You were wrongfully terminated by a manager who has a documented history of retaliatory behavior. That's not just unfair to you. It's a liability to the company and a betrayal of the values I built Ashford Global on. You're getting your job back, with back pay, and Janet Keller is going to face consequences for her actions." "She'll hate me even more," Elena pointed out. "She won't have the opportunity." "I'm transferring her to a position with no direct reports, while HR conducts a formal investigation into her management practices." He paused. "And I'm offering you a different role, one that better utilizes your skills and removes you from her chain of command entirely." Elena blinked, trying to process this through her medication-induced fog. "What kind of role?" "Senior analyst in the executive strategy division. You'd report directly to my CFO, Marcus Chen. The work is more complex, more visible, and comes with a significant salary increase. Enough to cover your medical expenses even without insurance, though obviously you'd have the company's platinum health plan." Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression serious. "I looked at your work this evening while you were in the lab. Those error corrections you made last quarter? You saved us from a cascade failure in our European investment portfolio that could have cost us $8 million. That kind of analytical precision is exactly what I need on my senior team." Elena felt tears prickling her eyes again, but these were different from all the crying she'd done today. These were tears of something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Possibility. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll give yourself permission to have a future that isn't just about survival." Nathaniel's voice had gone soft, almost pleading. "Say you'll stop punishing yourself for being sick. Stop accepting less than you deserve because you think your illness makes you a burden." The words hit Elena like a physical impact because they were true. She had been punishing herself, had internalized the message that her disease made her less valuable, less worthy of investment and opportunity. She'd been so focused on just staying alive that she'd stopped believing she deserved to actually thrive. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll say yes." Nathaniel smiled, and Elena realized she was beginning to recognize the different types of his smiles. The professional one for business, the sad one when he spoke of his sister, and this one, genuine and warm, that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Good. We'll handle all the paperwork once you're discharged. For now, just focus on getting stronger." He stood to leave, and Elena felt a sudden panic at the thought of being alone again. "Nathaniel?" She hadn't meant to use his first name. It felt too familiar, too presumptuous, but it slipped out naturally. He turned back, waiting, Why are you really doing all this? And please don't tell me it's just about your sister or about correcting an unjust termination. There's something else, isn't there?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim hospital lighting. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of honesty that felt almost painful. "When Caroline died, I made myself a promise that I would never let money, or the lack of it, determine whether someone lived or died if I had the power to intervene. That part is true. But you're right. There's more to it." He moved back to the chair, sitting on its edge like he might flee at any moment. "For 18 years, I've built an empire. I've accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've achieved every goal I set for myself after Caroline's death. And through all of it, I've felt hollow, like I was succeeding at everything except the thing that actually mattered, being present for another human being in their moment of crisis. I missed that chance with my sister because I was too young, too powerless. But today, standing in the rain watching you fall apart, I finally had the opportunity to be what I couldn't be for her, to actually use all this power and money for something that mattered on a human scale." He paused, meeting her eyes. "So yes, I'm doing this for Caroline, but I'm also doing it for myself because helping you helps me remember why I built all of this in the first place. Not for profit margins or market dominance, but for moments exactly like this, when money stops being abstract numbers and becomes the difference between someone's death and their future." Elena felt like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the billionaire CEO, not the distant authority figure, but a man who'd been carrying grief and purpose for nearly 2 decades, searching for a way to make his sister's death mean something. "You're a good person, Nathaniel Ashford." "I'm a flawed person trying to do something good," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. But thank you for seeing the intention behind the action." He stood again, and this time, Elena didn't stop him. She was suddenly overwhelmingly tired, her body demanding the rest it had been denied for months of stress and fear. But as Nathaniel reached the door, she called out one more time. "Nathaniel, tomorrow, when you come back, would you bring a camera? Any camera, even just your phone. I want to try something." He looked puzzled, but nodded. "Of course." "What are you planning?" "I'm going to photograph this room," Elena said, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "This exact moment in my life when everything changed, when I stopped just surviving and started believing I might actually have a future worth documenting." Nathaniel's expression softened into something Elena couldn't quite name: pride, maybe, or recognition, or hope. "I'll bring my camera, a good one, and tomorrow we'll capture this moment together." After he left, Elena lay in the hospital bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the 6th floor. Distant monitors beeping, soft footsteps in the hallway, the muted television from a nearby room. The loopy marine was working through her system, already beginning the complex process of suppressing her overactive immune response, buying her more time, more days, more possibilities. She thought about Nathaniel's question earlier. What if you didn't have to choose? For 3 years, she'd been making impossible choices. Health over dreams, survival over living, practicality over passion. She'd convinced herself that sacrifice was noble, that suffering made her stronger, that accepting less was realistic. But maybe, Elena thought, as sleep finally claimed her, maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe the bravest thing wasn't enduring alone, but accepting help. Maybe strength wasn't about carrying everything yourself, but about letting others share the weight. Maybe the real choice wasn't between survival and living. Maybe finally she could have both. Outside her window, Portland's lights continued their patient vigil against the darkness, and somewhere in that city, a man who'd been hollow for 18 years had finally found a purpose that fit the shape of his grief. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, consultations and decisions, conversations about employment and treatment plans, the complicated negotiation of two lives beginning to orbit each other. But tonight, Elena Reyes allowed herself to simply rest, knowing that for the first time in years, she wouldn't wake up alone in her fight. The future, she realized, had stopped being a countdown and started being a possibility, and that changed everything. Three months later, Elena stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office on the 52nd floor of Ashford Global Enterprises, watching the spring sun transform Portland into something luminous. The city looked different from this height. More hopeful, perhaps, or maybe that was just her own perspective shifting. She'd learned that altitude changed everything, that the same landscape could appear entirely different depending on where you stood to view it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel. "Rooftop in 10 minutes? I have something to show you." Elena smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Over the past 12 weeks, their relationship had evolved into something she still couldn't quite categorize. Not quite friendship, though they'd certainly become friends. Not quite romance, though there were moments, fleeting, electric, when she caught him looking at her in a way that made her breath catch. Mostly, they'd become something rarer, genuine partners in each other's healing. The rooftop garden was Nathaniel's private sanctuary, a space few employees even knew existed. Elena had been coming here regularly since her first week back at work, not back to her old position, but to the role Nathaniel had created for her. Senior analyst in executive strategy sounded impressive, but the reality was even better. She worked on complex financial models that actually challenged her intellect, collaborated with brilliant colleagues who valued her insights, and reported to Marcus Chen, a mentor who saw potential rather than liability when he looked at her. Janet Keller had been quietly transferred to a regional office in Idaho after the HR investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory terminations. Elena had felt no satisfaction in that outcome, only a quiet relief that no one else would suffer under that particular brand of cruelty. Nathaniel was already on the rooftop when Elena arrived, standing near the garden's western edge where cherry trees were just beginning to bloom. He'd shed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking less like a CEO and more like the man she'd come to know. Thoughtful, driven, carrying his grief with grace. "You're glowing," he said as she approached, and Elena knew he meant it medically rather than romantically. Her latest blood work had shown remarkable improvement. The lupimarine, combined with the aggressive treatment protocol Dr. Wolfe had implemented, had reduced her inflammation markers by 60%. Her kidney function was stabilizing. The pericardial effusion around her heart had resolved completely. "I feel good," Elena admitted. "Really good. Not just physically, but—" She gestured vaguely, trying to capture something ineffable. "Whole," Nathaniel supplied. "Yes, whole." Elena moved to stand beside him, both of them gazing out at the city. "I've been thinking about something you said that first night in the hospital. About how you'd felt hollow for 18 years, like you were succeeding at everything except what actually mattered." "I remember. Do you still feel that way?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, considering. No, he said finally. Not anymore. Helping you, watching you reclaim your life, seeing you thrive instead of just survive, it's given me something I didn't know I was missing. Purpose with a face. Impact I can witness rather than just measure in quarterly reports. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she'd been experiencing more frequently around Nathaniel lately. You saved my life. You know that, right? Not just medically, but in every way that matters. You gave me permission to want more than mere survival. You saved yourself, Nathaniel corrected gently. I just provided resources. You're the one who had the courage to accept help, to be vulnerable, to rebuild yourself stronger than before. We could debate causality all afternoon, Elena said, smiling. Or you could show me whatever you brought me up here to see. Nathaniel's expression shifted into something Elena had learned to recognize as barely contained excitement. He retrieved a large portfolio case from beside one of the planter boxes and handed it to her. Open it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all taken over the past 3 months. Elena recognized many from her own camera, the one Nathaniel had indeed brought to the hospital that second day. Pictures of Portland from various angles, studies of light and shadow, portraits of hospital staff who'd become friends during her treatment. But mixed among her work were other images, professional photographs of an art gallery space, empty and waiting. What is this? Elena asked, though her heart was already beginning to understand. It's a gallery space in the Pearl District, Nathaniel explained. 3,000 square feet, excellent natural lighting, prominent location. The previous tenant's lease expired last month. He paused, watching her face carefully. I bought the building. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she continued looking through the photographs. Nathaniel, before you protest, listen to the business proposition, he said quickly. You told me once that you'd put away photography because it didn't pay for Lupamarin. But what if it could? What if you had a space to display your work, to teach workshops, to build a sustainable business around your actual passion? Your medical expenses are covered through the company's health plan, some of the best insurance in the country. Your salary gives you financial security. So what's stopping you from pursuing the dream you abandoned? I don't have enough work for a gallery exhibition, Elena protested, but her voice was weak with hope. Then create it. Use your weekends, your evenings. Document Portland the way you documented indigenous communities in Mexico, with intention, with artistry, with the understanding that every image is preserving something essential. Nathaniel stepped closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. You have talent, Elena. Real talent. I've seen your photographs from college, the ones in that box you carried out of the building the day we met. You capture something in your images that most photographers spend their whole careers chasing. You make people feel seen. Elena felt tears threatening, but these were becoming familiar now. Tears of gratitude rather than despair, tears that marked expansion rather than loss. Why would you do this? You've already done so much. Because watching you come back to life over these past 3 months has been the most meaningful thing I've experienced since Caroline died, Nathaniel said, his voice raw with honesty. Because when I look at you, I see what my sister could have become if she'd been given the chance. Because helping you isn't charity, it's reciprocal healing. Your survival helps me make peace with her death. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, vulnerability mixed with determination. And because I've fallen in love with you, Elena Reyes. Somewhere between that rainy sidewalk and this rooftop garden, between hospital corridors and strategy meetings, I fell completely in love with your courage, your resilience, your refusal to let illness define your worth. And I want to spend whatever time you'll give me helping you build the life you deserve. Elena's breath caught. She'd felt the connection between them growing, deepening, but she hadn't dared name it, hadn't let herself believe that someone like Nathaniel Ashford could see her as anything more than a project, a way to assuage old guilt. But looking at him now, seeing the naked hope and fear in his eyes, she understood that this was real. "I'm still sick," she said softly. "I'll always be sick. I'll always need medication, always need monitoring, always carry the possibility of relapse." "I know," Nathaniel replied, "and I'm still grieving. I'll always carry Caroline's loss, always wonder if I could have done more, always feel that absence. We're both works in progress, Elena. But maybe that's exactly why we work. We understand that healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole despite our fractures." Elena set down the portfolio and took his hands in hers. They were warm, steady, strong enough to support weight without crushing it. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I think I started loving you that first night when you asked me what defined me beyond my circumstances. No one had asked me that in years. Everyone else only ever saw the disease, but you saw me." Nathaniel pulled her close, and Elena let herself be held, finally understanding that accepting support wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Around them, cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, each petal a small miracle of timing and survival. "So is that a yes to the gallery space?" Nathaniel asked against her hair, and Elena could hear the smile in his voice. "It's a yes to everything," Elena replied. "To the gallery, to building a life that's about thriving instead of just surviving, to taking risks I've been too afraid to take, to us." And they stayed like that for a long time, two people who'd found each other in a rainstorm and decided to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate losses. Below them, Portland continued its endless rhythm of commerce and connection, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. But up here, in this garden above the city, Elena Reyes and Nathaniel Ashford were writing their own narrative, one where endings became beginnings, where tragedy transformed into purpose, where two broken people discovered they fit together perfectly. 6 months later, Elena's first photography exhibition would open in that Pearl District Gallery to critical acclaim, her images of Portland's marginalized communities drawing comparisons to the documentary masters she'd once studied. A year after that, Nathaniel would propose in this same rooftop garden, with cherry blossoms falling like benediction. 2 years on, they'd established the Caroline Ashford Foundation, providing medical expense grants to patients facing impossible choices between treatment and financial ruin. But all of that was future, written in possibility rather than certainty. For now, in this moment suspended between past grief and future hope, Elena simply stood in Nathaniel's arms and felt grateful. Grateful for rain that forced honesty, for breakdowns that preceded breakthroughs, for a billionaire with a broken heart who'd learned that healing others could heal yourself. She'd been fired and left in tears, believing her life was ending. Instead, she'd found the person who would teach her how to truly live. Sometimes, Elena thought, the worst days become doorways to the best ones. You just have to be brave enough to walk through.